Hello, everyone, and welcome into the latest episode of Windy City Gridiron Radio. With you, as always, is your host, Robert Zaglinski. Today, we're going to discuss Cameron Meredith's offer sheet situation, do some more previews of draft prospects, jump into maybe some crazy trades if the Bears wanted to maximize Trubisky's rookie contract window. And to help me break all of this down, NBC Sports Chicago's Bears beat reporter, White Sox pinch hitter, JJ Stankevitz, as he coined it in the pre-show, Stanky Leg, JJ Stanky Leg, joins me now. JJ, what's up?
I don't actually dance moves that good. It's just like part of my name.
Oh, come on, don't be modest. If you have dance moves, you have to play that up a little bit. That's a quality that not a lot of people have, or not a lot of people are proud of. Like, it's 2018, JJ. It's 2018.
Yeah, and yet I still desperately need dance lessons for my wedding coming up this summer. So, yeah,
the Stanky Leg is perfect for your first dance too, as a married couple.
I'll run it by the fiance, but I feel like that might be rejected.
You never know. It never hurts to ask. You know that's a good philosophy. Just ask her, and she might say yes.
Well, you know what? There's only one way to find out.
Exactly. As I just mentioned, the Cameron Meredith offer sheet situation. So Meredith got an offer sheet from the Saints that he signed. It will pay him approximately 2 years, $10 million. With incentives, it'll be around a little over $12 million. The Bears and Ryan Pace put an original round tender on him to kind of more or less, I think the narrative that has surrounded it, and I've kind of pushed this narrative, is to get another team to effectively work the deal, and then the Bears quickly match. But we're 1 day away from the deadline, and then there's been a lot of blowback and criticism towards that strategy. JJ, what's going on? I mean, I wouldn't worry necessarily about the deadline, but this is your second wide receiver. I'm not sure as to how the strategy might go in necessarily letting him leave if we're going off that original narrative.
Yeah, the couple of things I can think of on that, Robert, are number one, if the Bears do let him leave,
yeah,
is that maybe the Bears don't want to rely on their two top wide receivers to come back from ACL. The success rate of receivers coming off ACL injuries recently is pretty good, but there have been some guys who haven't performed as well the year after they tore their ACL. So maybe the Bears say, well, we'll let Meredith walk. We would be willing to keep him for a cheaper price, but we'll let him walk, and then we'll go out and draft someone in the second round maybe who can replace him. The other thing I can think of too is that maybe Nagy and Helfrich in their kind of machinations of building this offense have said, well, we can keep him, but he's not, critical to it. I'm not so sure about that one. Just given that the way I look at Cam Meredith in this offense is that he's almost like a better Albert Wilson for the Chiefs offense in 2017. Given that Wilson ran, I think it was like 58% of his routes are out of the slot. Last year, Meredith in 2016, it was like 52%.
Yeah.
And, Meredith's a better receiver than Albert Wilson. I think that's pretty clear. And, different build, different size, all that. But I think you could pencil him in as sort of like the guy who can go inside, outside, be sort of have that ability to be flexible, to play off Allen Robinson and Taylor Gabriel. I think it would make a lot of sense if you're following what I'm saying. I think it would make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. I do. I do. I think everyone is. Yeah.
So yeah, the only thing I could see from the Bears' standpoint is kind of like I said, where maybe we don't want to keep him around at that price, given that then we're committing a lot of money to two guys who are coming off ACL injuries. But that being said, we can get into the whole Kevin White aspect of it. But if you don't keep him, then you're going to have Kevin White competing with maybe a second round pick to be sort of your second outside receiver. I don't know if that makes enough sense to not pay Cameron Meredith $5 to $6 million a year over the next 2 years.
I guess that kind of leads into it because that, like you just said, that price doesn't isn't necessarily that pricey for me to control a young receiver for 2 seasons in the middle of Trubisky's rookie contract window, where you're going to be able to overpay potentially at one position. I mean, with Meredith, the Bears would be over 30 million across four guys, I think.
Third and wide
receivers overall. That leads into me asking: do you believe that Pace put this original? Do you believe that notion that Pace put this original round tender to let other teams set the deal in a way that he's comfortable? Do you believe that story?
Yeah, I think that, when we talked with Pace down at the owners' meetings last month, he said, yeah, we knew this was a possibility. And I think, they're going to give it some time and sort of see what is out there for him. And if some team came in and gave him 2 years and 14, 16 million, you'd say, okay, well, fine. That may be a little bit too pricey, but they also knew no team was going to do that. And I think I've seen some of you guys making the points on Twitter that makes sense, is that you give Meredith the original round tender because then another team will go out and set his market. If you gave him the second round one, he's liable to say, I'm going to basically treat this as a 1 year prove it deal. I'm going to play 1 year on this. Then I'm an unrestricted free agent and I'm going to go out and make a ton of money. So I think the way that he did it was smart, where, you get the offer sheet, then you probably go out and match it. And then you have him for 2 more years. And like you brought up, Robert, that in Trubisky's rookie contract, that's not a lot of money to spend on a wide receiver who, if he matches his production, is a 66 catch guy. So that would make a lot of sense. And the other point here too is that everything that Ryan Pace has done since officially firing John Fox on New Year's Day has been to build a better structure around Trubisky. It's been to keep the defense basically stand pat. And then we're going to go out and do everything we can to build this structure around Trubisky to make sure that year 2, he has the best chance to succeed. And letting Cameron Meredith walk wouldn't jive with that, right? It would kind of be like, we've done all this and now we've let this guy go and now we're throwing the receiver position in a way to chance like we did last year. And that didn't really work out for us.
A lot of it too. If you let Meredith walk, then it's projections. Because like you keep mentioning Robinson's knee, so you have Robinson recovering well. They expect a big role from Trey Burton, but he's never produced in the way that they think he's going to. Adam Shaheen is still growing. Taylor Gabriel is probably at best like a third option as a receiver. And then again, there's still Kevin White. So everything about this offense is projection. And I know Meredith didn't play in 2017, but in 2016, he's proven him. He proved himself. You had a nice talent there that you could seamlessly implement into this offense. I mean, he's still only 25 years old. I don't know. Having this 2-year contract structure, matching it. I'm not necessarily getting into a panic or anything. I'm just saying that you have this 2-year contract structure where you're probably going to have more cap casualties in the next season or two, even before Trubisky's rookie deal, and you'll be able to afford Meredith if he plays really well in 2018 and 2019. You'll be able to give him potentially $10, $11, $12 million if you're comfortable with that. So,
and look at it this way: if you're kind of projecting out the cap right now, you pretty much, if you cut Deion Sims in a year, I'm actually pulling up his spot track right now so I can get this information right. But
no worries.
I'm just saying that basically that could probably take care of close to, if not all, of Meredith's salary in 2019 So hold on, let me just get this information right.
There's also a Kyle Long cut. I know that hasn't really been discussed widely, but
free agent. Let's see if they were to cut Deion Sims and my computer would actually work. Well, regardless, I can't pull this up in time for all the listeners out there.
Hold on, let me pull it up as well. It is.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so you'd save him $6 million. It looks like.
You can fit that in. I mean, what would you, if a Meredith is catching 65 passes for 800 and 900 yards? That's, I don't know, a $9 or $10 million receiver.
I mean, the way things are going this offseason, I mean, Albert Wilson got 3 years, $24 million. Richardson got 5 and 40. So yeah, we're probably looking at like maybe 4 years, 36, $40 million for Meredith.
Yeah, especially
And
for
the optics of, and football decisions are not made on the potential for optics, but for Ryan Pace, if you've done all these things to build the structure around Trubisky, and then you let this kid from Berwyn, who's an Illinois State product, walk to New Orleans and he's productive, the optics of that wouldn't be very good, especially if the Bears wide receiver core then went out to struggle this year. That would be a pretty tough mark on Ryan Pace's resume.
the homegrown Chicago kid. Oh my God, could you imagine Chicago sports radio, JJ? Come on.
Yeah.
Don't even bring that up. Don't even bring that up.
I would look forward to going on Sports Talk Live on our channel and having a spirited debate with David Kaplan about it.
Yeah. In your mind, so, okay, we've gone through every detail. The deadline is tomorrow, I believe in the afternoon. You expect the Bears to match ultimately.
I would lean that way. But I've been surprised before by decisions. So I would lean that they'll match. And it's interesting with Fuller. I think they kind of had to go and match immediately because it was the Packers and because they basically wanted to signal to Kyle Fuller, hey, like, you're our guy.
Mm-hmm.
With that big of a contract, you don't leave that one hanging for as long as 4 or 5 days, even though, yeah, maybe you could have tied up the Packers cap space wise. That's less important than, signaling your guy that he's your guy. Meredith is still, for as solid of a player as he is, he's a complimentary piece. So I think you can afford to take your time on this one like the Bears have.
Definitely. Moving on from receivers. So I keep talking about that maximizing of Trubisky's rookie contract window. And I don't think this is necessarily conducive for the Bears to go the way of the Rams with this experiment and crazy offseason that they've had, getting in Ndamukong Suh, Marcus Peters, Aqib Talib, Brandon Cooks.
Yeah.
But let's say the Bears made a crazy trade. Kind of went all in for these next 4 seasons. JJ, what's something conducive? I mean, we have guys like John Middlecoff from The Athletic saying Khalil Mack might be available for a king's ransom, for example.
Mm-hmm. That would be interesting just because the Bears, you look at what the Rams have done, and yeah, they went out and they traded for Sammy Watkins and they spent some money last offseason, but it took them winning for them to really get this aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at their window and saying, okay, you know what? We think Jared Goff actually is this guy that we want. And Sean McVay, wow, that worked out just as well, if not better than we expected. And you know what? Like, let's go for it.
Mm-hmm.
The Bears are not there yet because they still want to build through the draft, and they're still kind of building up that core around a lot of these guys. But that being said, I think if we looked at where the Bears are in a year, and if they've made the playoffs, I would not be surprised if Ryan Pace got the go-ahead to be very aggressive and very creative like Les Snead has been this year. What that would look like, I think, would probably be going out and finding a pass rusher. I mean,
that's not really the easiest thing to do, JJ.
No, it's not, because no one wants to part with pass rushers, obviously.
Yeah.
And if they do, it's because something's probably wrong with them. So I would say, the Bears will probably keep it pretty standard right now. Maybe they explore trading down if things kind of fall their way in the draft and there's a quarterback on the board at number 8 that a team like maybe the Dolphins wants. But at this point, I think we're probably looking at the picks the Bears have or the picks they're going to keep, and they're going to go out and use to fill out the roster as opposed to going and paying, like you said, a king's ransom for someone like Khalil Mack.
Would you outside of trades, because this kind of offseason the Bears haven't really had in a long time where they were really aggressive in like spending on top targets necessarily. They were bargain bin shopping in 2017 and then really went all out this year. If they didn't do a trade, would you expect them to be as aggressive next offseason with everything you just outlined?
Probably.
In the market?
I would say that for the Bears case, they got the quarterback last year, but they got Trubisky after free agency, essentially.
Yeah.
And whether or not it was their plan all along or they knew they were going to get him, you don't want, like, you need to get the quarterback in place first. And that doesn't mean that you like wait around to see if he's good to go out and get the pieces. You have to go out and get the pieces before you know if he's going to be this great player or not. But I think, the strategy was like, okay, let's keep kicking it down the road a little bit, see if we can hit on one of these cheap, flyer type guys. And then when we get the quarterback, that's when we're going to go for it. And I think, Ryan Pace deserves a lot of credit for his cap management, with a lot of these contracts that were 3 or 4 year deals that actually turned out to really be 1 or 2 year deals.
Yeah.
The only contract you can look at and say that they probably would like that one back would be Pernell McPhee. And, even Mike Glennon, those $18.5 million, flushed down the drain, but it was only 1 year, and the Bears had plenty of cap space, and it's not like it really hurt them who they wanted to sign. So, I think, Pace will continue to be aggressive while Trubisky's on his rookie contract, just knowing that, look, this is the best window to kind of get things going. It's almost like if you view it as almost like an airplane where you're sort of in ascent right now and you haven't reached cruising altitude. You get all these pieces, and then when you have to give Trubisky a second contract, you figure he's at sort of cruising altitude where he can then make everyone around him a lot better.
Yeah,
and
the ideal plan.
You may not have to be third in wide receiver spending anymore. You may not have to be fourth in tight end spending, because your quarterback will make a decent player good and a good player great at those positions.
So it's just about maximizing the window. I mean, I think they have that ideal. Yeah. Moving on, because Khalil Mack that's an unrealistic possibility. I'm of the opinion that as much as they want to stand pat, that their biggest needs are still on the defensive side of the ball, especially with receiver and the playmakers more or less taken care of. They don't have anything opposite Leonard Floyd. They don't. I think they might have a question mark at inside linebacker, potentially both, because Danny Trevathan hasn't necessarily been healthy in his first 2 seasons. Neither is Nick Kwiatkowski, for that matter. And then go ahead.
Definitely have something in Leonard Floyd.
Yeah.
I know he's your boy.
He is my boy.
Son, but
he's my son.
He's averaging. I wrote it the other day. He's averaging something like 1 sack per 90 snaps in his career, or something along those lines. And he's a good cover linebacker. He showed he can do a lot more than just be a pass rusher. But the Bears drafted him to be a pass rusher. They drafted him to get sacks, and so far he hasn't quite delivered that yet. This is a big year for him, and he's got to stay healthy and he's got to be more productive. Hold on a second. I got the snap thing here. Yeah, 1 sack every 97 snaps for Leonard Floyd. Vic Beasley, 1 per 69 in his career, and Pernell McPhee, 1 per 81 in his career.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that doesn't take into account certain, down and distance and all that. But look, the Bears traded up to get Leonard Floyd, and he's got to deliver more. So I think that's kind of your step one as a pass rusher. And then, going out and finding someone in the draft to play opposite beside him is critical.
I think for as much as everyone focuses on the offense, like I don't know that this is the tricky part here, because it's a weak edge class. Prince Amukamara, he's probably not your long-term second cornerback. You're going to count on Eddie Jackson making a leap and being better, because he was good in his rookie year, but he wasn't necessarily spectacular. He made mistakes in key moments at times. I don't know how they can improve, and if they're going to be – a lot of their improvement will come from the fact that Trubisky's competent, that the offense is competent, and maybe they'll get it to 7-9, 8-8, 9-7. But the NFC North has also gotten better. The NFC as a whole has gotten better. And without their defense taking another step from top 10, and I don't really consider them a top 10 defense. That was yardage, and that's not wholly accurate. I don't know that I really buy this Rams-Eagles-like leap yet as much of goodwill as there's yet, because there's not that many options to improve the defense.
Yeah, I think the options are all internal. It's, like you said, it's Eddie Jackson taking another step. It's Kyle Fuller taking another step. It's Kyle Fuller going from being a really good cornerback to great cornerback. And I liked what Vic Fangio said back in January when he was, kind of asked about how he viewed last year's defense. And he was basically like, look, if we were a great defense, we would have won more than 5 games. He had a quote along the lines of like, we need our so-called good players to be great players. And, that means Akeem Hicks. I think he's got another gear in him. I think Akeem Hicks is pretty pissed off he didn't make the Pro Bowl. I think he's got another gear in him that's going to be even better than we saw last year.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it is. I would not want to be an offensive lineman in the NFC North and have to deal with an even more motivated Akeem Hicks. A guy like Danny Trevathan hasn't played 16 games in 4 years, something like that.
Yeah.
They got to figure out the other inside linebacker spot, which puts a guy like Tremaine Edmonds very much up there on the draft board, or, even like a Roquan Smith. If they don't like Kwiatkowski that much, they got to get more out of Jonathan Bullard, who looks like he's in line to be kind of the third or the second end in that system now. They got to get more out of Adrian Amos. I know Pro Football Focus's grades love him, but I think he still has another gear. And
I know he also hates me for my tweets and retweets me and favorites everything.
Oh, he does?
Yeah. Oh. He uses it as a poster board, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Well, hey, whatever motivates him. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm just making light of it. Funny.
Keep talking trash about his game, and maybe he'll play better.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, he had a pretty good season last year, so if you were already doing that, then I think you might be onto something. But I mean, no, I think you look at Amos and Eddie Goldman, and the Bears probably are going to try to get a deal done with Eddie Goldman before Amos. But I also wouldn't be surprised if the Bears went out and they drafted Minkah Fitzpatrick or Derwin James and essentially played him in the nickel this year and then let Amos walk and then moved him to safety. That could be another option as well for them. So that, there are so many moving parts here on this defense, but you're absolutely right. Like, whatever improvements come from this defense are probably going to be with the guys who are already on the roster, and then 2 to 3 draft picks. And you're lucky if those guys are full-time starters in year one.
I'm guessing that you would invest most of the incoming draft on defense from your
perspective. Absolutely. The only way I wouldn't is if Quentin Nelson were there at number 8. I wouldn't even use up 5 seconds of the draft. I would make that.
You mentioned Roy Robertson, Harris, and Jonathan Bullard. I think that goes to the Akeem Hicks having another gear because, I mean, at some points he was playing 95% of the snaps last year. At some point, you can't have him doing that if he's going to show another gear. Roy Robertson, Harris, and Jonathan Bullard have to more or less, I guess, one of them has to be a consistent starter. They don't have to be a great player, but one of them has to be a consistent starter unless you're drafting a guy late.
And, we talk about starter at that other end position, but Mitch Unright only played like 48% of the Bears snaps last year. So, for as valuable as a player as Unrein was, I mean, you remember talking to Jay Rogers during the season, basically saying, like, the stuff Unrein does lets Hicks and Goldman play fast and all that. But, I think Bullard he's a more talented player than Unrein. He's just got to show that in year 3 he kind of gets it. And, from all indications, I think his tape last year was pretty decent when he was in it. Wasn't lighting the world.
Yeah, he's serviceable. He was serviceable.
Yeah, he was serviceable. You could see some signs that in year 2 he was starting to get it. And I think if you project out for some gains in year 3, you're definitely okay with him being there. And, then Roy Robertson Harris is an absolute athletic freak who, I think another year playing and practicing in Fangio's system is definitely going to benefit him as well.
The other guy, the edge, who right now is probably the starter, the way things are going to come down to, is Aaron Lynch, who I don't want to necessarily call him a reclamation project, but it hasn't been easy for him in San Francisco until he signed with the Bears. He's back with his original defensive coordinator. I mean, how much can we actually expect from him? This is a guy that had 12 sacks his first 2 seasons and then largely just nothing, a puff of smoke.
Yeah, he had some weight issues. He was suspended for, I think it was I can't remember if it was PED or if it was a a substance abuse
I think
thing.
it was substance abuse things while he was having his weight issues. That's
right.
That's what it was.
And,
Yeah.
I think too, probably getting back to Fangio, getting the fresh start, that can benefit. That could definitely benefit him. But that being said, the Bears, I don't think you can count on Aaron Lynch, just because you're right. He hasn't played a whole lot recently, and he's only had, I think, 2.5 sacks.
Yeah.
So
I think at best he's a number 3. That's what he should be in a good defense.
Yeah, he would be. So, maybe you look out, and like you said, it's a really weak draft for edge guys. And Bradley Chubb's not fallen to number 8 from all indications. And number 8's probably a little too high to draft Marcus Davenport, probably a little too high to draft Harold Landry. And, that kind of presents this interesting scenario because we've seen it so many times where teams get burned for overdrafting for need with the top 10 pick. I think the Bears are going to stick to best available there. And then maybe you look at a guy like Kamiko Toure later in the draft or something along those lines. Or like if Sam Hubbard is still available with your second round pick, maybe you go. I think that's how you're going to have to fill out the edge rushing position because there's not that guy who you can say – there's not even like a Derek Barnett even in this class maybe. So, yeah, it's just kind of a weak class, which is bad timing for the Bears, to be sure.
For their overall need. I liked the suggestion and purely for the potential comedic factor of Derwin James and Minkah Fitzpatrick because not totally similar scenarios because Adrian Amos is actually a productive and good player.
Right.
But I can just imagine the Bears inviting Amos to their draft party and then drafting a safety with the first pick.
Yeah.
Like Mike Lennon.
Just on a purely human level, that would be a shame.
It would be a shame. I'm saying like in terms of just like black humor is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, he worked his butt off to
absolutely.
From losing his starting job to Quentin Demps to work his butt off to get back in there and then be a really solid player. He's not someone who would deserve that kind of black humor. That's for sure.
He's coming on it, but the thing is too that's the reason I bring that possibility up is because he's on the last year of his deal.
Right.
It depends on how much he's going to want to get paid. I think that has to be. I mean, we're 2 weeks out, a little 2 weeks out from the draft. They might rather have a young safety that they can have on a rookie deal for 5 years as opposed to paying Amos $6 or $7 million for, in my opinion, a guy that can't cover, that isn't maybe is a little bit of a liability in pass coverage sometimes.
Yeah, well, and the Bears' defense, for as solid as you can call that secondary last year, they didn't have a lot of playmakers. There weren't a lot of big plays, save for that Jackson game against Carolina. I mean, both of Kyle Fuller's interceptions came in December. Prince Amukamara didn't have one. Amos finally had his first career interception against Baltimore. The Bears they need playmakers. And if they say, hey, we think Minkah Fitzpatrick is going to pick off 5-6 balls a year and be an absolute menace otherwise, then yeah, we can take him because as Fangio said, we need our so-called good players to be great. And if you draft a guy you think is going to be great, then go with him. Absolutely.
Nice little segue. We weren't going to break down Fitzpatrick, but that was a nice little breakdown there. I have 3 guys that I sent along to you in the pre-show when I want, and then they're not necessarily the most realistic possibilities, or I don't necessarily expect the Bears to pick them, but we'll discuss each of them as a consideration at number 8 overall. And the first guy I brought up to you, Georgia's Roquan Smith as an inside linebacker. So I'm not particularly fond of his ceiling. I think the player he is now is more or less the player he's going to be in the league, which is still damn good. That's still damn good. It depends on how they view their inside linebacker position, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I think I'm sure you've talked about Tremaine Edmonds and.
Well, that's my favorite pick. So that's my.
Yeah. I mean, he's the guy who I consistently keep mocking to the Bears just because it makes so much sense. Because if you're looking between Edmonds and Smith is the guy you can plug him in right now and he'll be a day one starter and probably be a pretty good one.
Mm-hmm. Edmonds
is the guy, if you get him in your building, he could be a great outside linebacker. He could be one of the best inside linebackers in the NFL. Just that projection on Edmonds is a lot wider. I mean, I like Roquan Smith's game. I used to cover Notre Dame, so I still followed them pretty closely this year. And that game, I mean, Roquan Smith was all over the field. He was really good in that game. And I like his game. He's fast. He can get sideline to sideline. He's got good instincts. And a guy who I think, if they were to draft him, would play off Trevathan well. But yeah, I think you're kind of right. What you see with Roquan Smith is what you get. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you kind of, I think with the 8th overall pick, you might want to roll the dice a little bit more and go after someone like Edmonds, who has a really high ceiling.
And yeah, that's a great point. That doesn't necessarily fit the pace profile of picks. I mean, each of his guys with the first rounder have been, they've been guys that are raw, that the Bears want to get in their hands and mold themselves, but incredibly athletic. So
yeah, I think and that's always brought up, as it regards to Quentin Nelson, with like the projection on Quentin Nelson, he's not like this like raw athlete who just get him in the building, but my God, Quentin Nelson's so good. Like,
yeah, he's the exception probably to this.
Yeah, I think he'd be the exception. Just like get him back with Harry Hiestand, and there's a probably 6-time All-Pro.
I don't want to hyperbolize, but he's probably a Pro Bowler his first season. I mean, he's probably already close. He's not close to his ceiling, but he's probably at a higher level than most starting guards right now.
Yeah, I was talking to someone at Notre Dame who basically just made the point to me of like, I cannot believe that teams are overthinking this with Quentin Nelson.
Yeah,
and, close to the program, and it probably has maybe more rosy-colored eyes about Nelson than anyone else. But it was still just kind of like, I cannot believe that anyone would say, well, I don't know about him.
Well, okay. I didn't originally, but since we're going to discuss Notre Dame offensive line, we're going to discuss another one in a second. Let's move to Nelson, or let's keep. What would you think because I'm not overthinking Nelson. He's going to be a stud.
Yep.
I'm just wary of picking a guard that high.
Right.
And I know the league is moving more towards having dominant interior pass rushers that you want to counter. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't change the fact to me that a guard is still less valuable than a tackle. I still think a tackle is more valuable. So, Harry Hiestand. Mm-hmm. Was there a potential there to move him to tackle and like as a viable move if the Bears took him?
He recruited Nelson as a tackle, and Nelson, his redshirt freshman year, was Zach Martin's backup. Mm-hmm. He had the luxury of redshirting because Zach Martin played every single friggin' snap that year and was one of the best players in college football.
Mm-hmm. Another top guy.
Yeah. So, I think that could be a potential. And, if we're looking at Mike McGlinchey too, who I know you sent me in the pre-show, look up who has the longer wingspan between Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey. And if you just look at them, you'd be like, oh, it's McGlinchey. Look at his arms. It's actually Quentin Nelson because his chest is so thick. So
he's such a bowling ball.
Yeah. Nelson's got the wingspan to play tackle. And I think he could do that. And you could sign him now and plug him in at guard immediately, get a Pro Bowler, and then say, okay, in a year, let's evaluate and let's see if we want to pull off this move to tackle. But let's just get him in the building now, play him at guard. We'll be great there, and then figure out if we want to move him to tackle.
That would fit, and I think you can give that a trial run. It'd be more careful than what John Fox and the previous staff did with Kyle Long, kind of moving him like in off-season activities or not even off-season activities. Like I think it was like in August. That should be much more careful development for a guy that's still 22. I don't know his exact age. I wrote about him so much, but I think he's 22.
Yeah, I learned pretty quickly in covering Notre Dame. Just trust whatever Harry Hiestand's doing.
Yeah, he's a guru. You mentioned McGlinchey, so he's the tackle with the shorter wingspan. But I don't necessarily see him as a possibility. But there is that Hiestand familiarity. I think he's the best tackle in this draft if we're not counting Nelson's projection to that position. How do you think he would fit here in Chicago?
It'd be a really interesting move because the Bears seem to be pretty okay with Bobby Massey. There wasn't a whole lot of buzz about him being released. And you could draft McGlinchey and say, well, McGlinchey probably needs another year of development.
Mm-hmm.
Did play he was a fifth-year guy at Notre Dame, but had some issues with speed rushers. That Georgia game in particular, as well as the Miami game, he did struggle in those two games. So I think you could look at it and say, well, we'll draft McGlinchey, we'll play Massey there one more year, and then we'll throw McGlinchey in at right tackle, and I think he'd be a really fine right tackle. I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense for them to draft a tackle that high.
Mm-hmm. Especially in another weak tackle class overall.
Not an elite tackle class. It's not like, you're going to have Ronnie Stanley available at number 8 or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if they were to draft McGlinchey, it would be because he slipped all the way to the second round, and you had Harry Heastand and a couple of your scouts pounding the table for him. But I think it's pretty unlikely he slips that far. So, but as a fit, I wouldn't be surprised if they did take a tackle at some point, and maybe it's a 5th or 6th round guy who they think is, developmental projection, like a Brandon Parker from North Carolina, and say, we'll get this guy in here, we'll work with him, we'll develop him, and then hopefully in a year he's ready to take over for Massey at right tackle.
See that exactly. That goes in line with the rookie contract window too. I think they have to take some kind of tackle in this draft, whether it is McGlinchey in the first or Parker, whoever else, because Massey to me is fine, but I don't think he's a guy that you can, if they're trying to compete for a championship, I don't think he's competent enough. I think he's too much of a liability once they would get into January, which is where they want to go against other elite pass rushers, to win, to effectively win without like having a costly mistake. Either way, I think they have to get a guy in, and then he has to be the starter by 2019. I mean, you have to have that piece solidified. Massey was originally brought in as a stopgap, not to be here for not to be the starter for 3 years. I think that.
But I think that you have to do it, because if you don't, or if the guy you draft doesn't pan out, then you're going to really have to overpay for a tackle in free agency.
Yeah.
This kind of goes into the feeling on Nelson of, why the Bears should draft him. The pool of talented offensive linemen seems to shrink every single year, of guys who are like, really reliable, good offensive linemen. They're just aren't, they're not as easy to find now as they were 10 years ago. And
they're not coached as well either in college.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And I think that's why you see Andrew Norwell, who is a bona fide good offensive lineman, get that huge contract, or Nate Solder, who maybe isn't even like an elite offensive lineman, all of a sudden become the highest paid offensive lineman in the NFL.
Yeah.
That's sort of what the Bears would have to, that's the market they'd have to get into at that point. And then we're really talking about starting to look at a cap crunch at some point. So, I think you're absolutely right about that. They need to draft a tackle at some point to start to develop him and hope to turn him into someone who can replace Massey by 2019.
For the final prospect, before we do a little mailbag, JJ, Saquon Barkley. So this kind of goes in line with, I don't know. I wouldn't personally do it at number 8 overall. I think running backs are almost, if you follow the money, running backs are almost as valued as kickers.
Right.
I wrote about this, a tweet about this last week by NFL teams, and you don't necessarily need a feature workhorse to win in the league. But if you're going to invest in the position, if you're going to want a guy that is the best in the draft, I mean, Barkley is the best running back in the 2018 draft, and that would probably mean that the Bears had traded Jordan Howard after his little Instagram snafu. So Barkley at number 8. What do we have here? JJ? Hello? We lost JJ. I'm not sure, though. JJ, I can't. Damn it.
Okay, good.
Good. So as I was introducing, we had Saquon Barkley, our last draft prospect.
Yeah.
After a little audio issues there. I guess I don't value I was saying I don't value running backs necessarily as much as probably really any other position on the field aside from kickers. And the way the NFL values them, if you follow the money, it's the same way. Kickers are almost paid just as much as running backs. And kickers are guys that maybe play 12 snaps a game, 10 snaps a game, depending on how things shake out. Yeah. But Barkley is the best guy in the 2018 draft, and this would go in line with a potential trade of Howard, depending on how much you how much you put stock into social media, or him putting his pictures back on Instagram this morning of the Bears. Barkley's fit. What do we think here, JJ?
Yeah, well, since we're talking about Saquon Barkley, my dog decided to bark. Get it?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
5 of 10. 5 of 10.
Yeah. I think I'm kind of with you that unless the Bears have this value of Saquon Barkley as like a Hall of Famer who's just this ideal, perfect, rosy fit for Matt Nagy's offense, then yeah, I think you probably look elsewhere. The interesting thing here would be is if the Bears got to 8 and Barkley's on the board, could they trade down at that point? Could they call up a team that is in need of a running back that's maybe closer to contending and say, hey, like, you know, what are you going to offer us for Saquon Barkley? Because at that point, you're a team that is like, you know, well, the last missing piece for us is a running back. Then maybe you do think about trading up and getting Barkley. Or, you know, maybe it's a team that thinks they're close to contending and wants to go up and get Barkley. And maybe that team's the Bears, but Yeah, I just think that since you already have Jordan Howard there, you already have Tariq Cohen there, you're barely spending any money at the running back position and getting pretty good production, that you probably don't need to invest a whole lot else into that position.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I would say Barkley's probably not there, except if, kind of like I said, the Bears just like they're absolutely enamored with him, and they every single one of their scouts, Ryan Pace, Josh Lucas, and Matt Nagy are all pounding the table for him. Then they would go get him. But other than that, I think they're good standing pat.
What would you, if they say they had Barkley fell to 8 and they didn't take him, what would you gauge as trade value for them to trade down? And I don't think you mentioned an actual. You didn't mention a specific team, so that's fine. But what kind of haul could they get for Barkley?
Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting, just given the value of running backs. But I'd hope that you would swap first round picks and then get a third, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a little bit too high. But if basically you're telling this team like, hey, if you really want to trade up this high to get Barkley, you must think he's pretty good. So you can afford to give us that third round pick. Because if he's a Hall of Famer like you think he is, you're not going to miss that third round pick.
Right.
Which is basically what the Bears did with Trubisky last year, where they essentially gave up a third round pick because they thought this guy's a Hall of Famer. And maybe I'm underselling it. Maybe they could get more for him. But it is just kind of tricky with how running backs are valued, like you were getting at.
Like I said, Barkley would be intriguing, but it's not. It just doesn't seem like the fit for that. Let's move to the mailbag to close this off, JJ. A few questions. We have, could Hronis pursue? So he has the connection with Mark Helfrich from Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
He was originally slated to be the starting center prior to the 2016 season before tearing his ACL at Family Fest at Soldier Field, and it's been. I wouldn't say, because he's been working hard, but in terms of his on-field production and him being okay as a starter and being okay as even a depth guy, it's been a downhill slide since then. Could he potentially experience a reinvigoration? Is he an option at center? Potentially even this year, you move Cody Whitehair over, say they don't get Nelson, something like that.
Yeah, I think the Helfrich connection is kind of the obvious one there, but the more important guy is Harry Hiestand.
Mm-hmm.
Can Hiestand sort of figure out a way to get Grisou back to sort of the ascending player that he kind of was a couple years ago?
Right.
Before that injury? I think that's going to be more interesting. What the Bears have done right now is if they don't go out and draft a guard, which I think the only way they would probably draft a guard at this point is if it were Quentin Nelson, the way things are kind of up. If they don't go out and do that, then you would say they go into training camp with these 3 spots open in the interior, one of which will go to Cody Whitehair, one of which will go to Kyle Long. But Whitehair, if, let's say Earl Watford comes in and you're like, oh, this guy's a pretty good player, we'll start him. Or if Eric Kush comes back healthy and you feel like he's the answer, like, he played pretty well in 2016, I think he's probably the guy, then Whitehair plays center. But if you come in and Grisou plays great and looks a lot stronger than he was last year, still coming off the ACL, then maybe you say, we're going to stick Whitehair at guard, and that's going to be his long-term position. And now we feel like we've got guard set between Whitehair and Long, and center now all of a sudden is set with Grisou there. And maybe, you start thinking about Grisou getting a second contract sometime early next year, something along those lines. So I think that's an interesting calculation. What was interesting at Notre Dame is that Harry Hiestand rarely would settle on his starting 5 in the offensive line until usually about 2 weeks before the season started. I speak to what he did with the Bears back in the late, or like 2005 to 2008 or whenever he was here. But he's a guy who's kind of willing to sort of let things play out and, try a couple different things before he finds that combination that he likes. So I think you could probably expect the same thing from the Bears, where during training camp into those preseason games, it probably won't be until the 3rd preseason game in which the Bears do settle on their starting offensive line. And it could be some mixing and matching in the first couple ones. I guess the 4th preseason game, because they have the extra one.
Yeah, the annual, I don't even know what to call it. It's not. It's nothing fun to watch against the Browns. I was gonna come up with something really snarky or funny there, but I failed.
The last game of the year of the preseason, which is always an absolute hoot.
Yes, that is JJ again with another ringer. Okay, so if we go through the entire Bears draft, what is your ideal? Like, I guess this doesn't have to be a mock necessarily, but if you want to name specific players, go ahead. What is your ideal from the first pick to the 7th round?
Say first pick for first 2 picks are defense, and I think preferably that would be an inside or outside linebacker with the first pick, and then probably another outside linebacker with the second.
Okay.
I think you got to take multiple swings at outside linebacker. And let's say if it's Tremaine Edmonds with the first your first round pick, then I think you go outside linebacker again with the second round pick, with the thought that Tremaine Edmonds may not wind up at outside linebacker.
Right.
I think 4th, 5th round, I'd still probably look at taking a wide receiver with one of those picks, and probably a corner or probably a cornerback with the other. 6th, 7th round, we're probably talking defensive end, another defensive lineman there, and then I'll just throw it out. 7th round, take a punter.
Yeah, why not? Why not? I forget the name of the guy. Michael, is it Michael Dixon this year?
Yeah,
Michael Dixon. Yeah.
Go ahead and take a punter. See if you weren't really ready to commit that much money and that many years to O'Donnell, go out and give him some competition. Find a punter and make it a good one. They could just as easily obviously go the undrafted route and pick up a guy who didn't survive cut down day in September, but yeah, go out and see if you can find yourself a punter who you really like, and kind of go from there. I think that this is going to be a very defense-heavy draft. I think them signing Benny Cunningham, to me, probably took a running back off the board. Case has taken a running back with in the 4th or 5th round in each of his first 3 drafts, but they like Cunningham a lot, and I don't think there's room for another running back in that room. So maybe that 7th round pick, if it's not a punter, maybe it's a developmental quarterback. Maybe it's a guy to sort of be either a camp arm or compete with Tyler Bray, something along those lines. So I'm not going to put too much emphasis and too much thought beyond that into the 7th round pick, but I think it's got to be a lot of defense.
Do you have another question? Do you have any under the radar prospects that you particularly are very fond of for the Bears? So I guess it depends on what your definition of under the radar is, but
right. Depending on that, a guy I mentioned earlier was Brandon Parker, the tackle from I think he's 6'7", 300 something pounds. He was Tariq Cohen's left tackle in college, and he's a guy who I like those kind of athletic tackles or just offensive linemen in general who you can sort of get later on in the draft.
Yeah.
So I would say he'd be someone who I would like to say is an under the radar guy who I wouldn't mind. Someone like maybe like a Jamon Moore from Missouri as a late round wide receiver. I'm saying that.
Wait, Mizzou bias. Come on, JJ.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of it. But yeah, a bigger guy who, if you don't keep Cameron Meredith, could maybe be an option to replace him. A guy who could probably profiles as a decent special teamer too. So yeah, I think that's probably those 2 guys maybe as sleepers, sort of along those lines. But those guys are always so hard to find. I mean, if you asked me last year who a sleeper is, I probably would not have come up with Tariq Cohen.
Yeah,
and he turned out to be the kind of an ultimate sleeper for the Bears. So yeah, I'll say those 2 guys, and if they draft one of them, I look great, and if not, forget that I said it.
And then finally, where would you currently project the Bears finishing in the NFC North? Because that's always the competing standpoint. That's what this all boils down to. This entire 4 months of over analysis, of just picking apart guys and seeing if they're good chefs in the mold of Eli Apple. If they can't cook for themselves, doing things like that. So this is what this all boils down to.
They're a good millennial or a bad millennial.
They're a good millennial or a bad millennial. This is what the NFL draft season has become. Yep. But ultimately, it's about the standings. Ultimately, it's about what happens on the field. I think a lot of people forget that. Mm-hmm. Where do you see the Bears finishing in the North, competing, all that good stuff?
At this point, it's kind of like I'd sound kind of foolish if I didn't say last place, just because that's finished. And I'm not super high on Detroit, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
But I still think that, you look at the quarterbacks in the division, and Trubisky, maybe he'll make the gains that the Bears think, but even if he does, he still could be the worst quarterback in the division. And he could still be one of the best quarterbacks then in the league. But I still just think that they'll be competitive. I think you're, conservatively, if you're being optimistic, like a 2 to 3 win game, which gets them to 7 or 8 wins, and means you're probably playing meaningful games in December. But yeah, I think right now I'd still probably have to say last, but maybe that'll change depending on who they draft or, how caught up in the hype you get during training camp or any of that stuff. So yeah, we got a lot of time to have a lot of analysis that'll ultimately maybe be proven meaningless come September.
Hey, it's the honeymoon phase. You were supposed to say 14 wins, JJ. You were supposed to go like 13 or 14 wins. Everybody's still enamored with Nagy and company. Come on.
I'm too concentrating on planning my own honeymoon.
With the stanky leg dance, and
it'll cut into training camp actually. So I'll have some catching up to do when I get back.
Definitely. JJ, would you consider are you a millennial?
Yeah, I'm absolutely 100% full on millennial.
So does this like concept of millennials not being good quarterbacks, does this apply to us as writers and reporters? I was curious as to that.
I'm sure it does. Me and Kevin Fishbane on the beat are holding down the millennial fort, and probably means that we're, I don't know, like the 2 worst in the beat writer rankings. Just
automatically, they look down upon you.
We have other interests. Yeah.
So, like having a personal life outside of it, and asking why.
Yeah. And having opinions on things.
Wow.
A good quarterback because he needs to ask why. Funny thing about that, so does Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
You can't see right now, but I'm face palming.
I have my chin in my palm, so it's more or less the same thing. Yeah. He is JJ Stankevitz. He is the Bears beat writer for NBC Sports Chicago. Occasionally writes about the White Sox. He is an unabashed, biased Mizzou grad, as much as and he's not shy about it. And he does, and he's planning on doing the stanky leg at his wedding. You can follow him on Twitter at JJ Stankevitz, as written. It's STANKEVITZ, and catch all of his work at NBC Sports Chicago. Catch him on Sports Talk Live on NBC Sports Chicago and otherwise. JJ, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, man. Good stuff.
You can follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron. Follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski. And keep it posted with us over these next 2 weeks as we look into more millennials and break down why they're asking why. Stay close, everybody.